Important moment, it is my great pleasure to welcome Sir Keir Starmer, Leader of the Opposition, to the stage. Welcome, Sir Keir.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that introduction and for everything you've done over the last 5 years as Director General of the CBI. Carolyn and I got to know each other in the twists and turns of the Brexit process. And from then on, Carolyn's always been there to help and advise. And I've valued her support and her friendship immensely. Carolyn, the CBI, business, and the whole country owe you a huge debt. It's my pleasure to be able to speak to you today and to do so for the first time as the leader of the Labour Party. I'm under no illusion about the work we have to do if we have to win back your trust. We have to build bridges. And today, I want to set out the new partnership I want to build between British business and the Labour Party. I want to start, though, by addressing the immediate crisis the country is facing. I don't blame the government for coronavirus, but I do blame it for the way it's been handled. I can't forgive the catalogue of mistakes that have cost lives and livelihoods. The two pillars of the government's approach, the £12 billion track and trace system and local restrictions, have been swept away by the second wave and shown to be totally inadequate. Even more unforgivable, the central lesson of the first wave was ignored, that if you are to control this virus, you have to act early and decisively, and that if you don't, the cost of people's health and the health of the economy is much, much worse. One of the things I've learned from this crisis is that it exposes leadership like nothing else. On that count, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have failed. They failed to learn, they failed to listen, and they failed to lead. The result is tragic, but all too predictable. On the 21st of September, the government's own scientist, SAGE, recommended an urgent 2 to 3 week circuit breaker in order to prevent the virus getting out of control. On that day, there were 11 deaths from COVID-19 and there were just over 4,000 COVID infections. The Prime Minister failed to heed that warning. 40 days later, when he finally decided to announce a longer 4-week national lockdown, those figures had increased to 326 deaths a day and 22,000 COVID cases. That is the human cost of the government's inaction. And the impact on business and on jobs will be severe. Make no mistake, the Chancellor's name is all over this. His decision to block a circuit breaker, to dismiss it as a blunt instrument, and to pretend that you can protect the economy without controlling the virus, will now mean that businesses have to close for longer. More people will lose their jobs, and the public finances will be worse than they needed to be. It makes me so angry and so frustrated that when the British people and British businesses have given so much and made so many sacrifices, they have been let down so badly by the government. It is now essential that tough national measures are taken to get the virus back under control. Better late than never. And Labour will provide the votes the Prime Minister needs to be sure of getting this through Parliament. But we'll also be clear. It must be accompanied by a comprehensive economic support package. The Chancellor has already announced 3 economic plans in the last 4 weeks. All were insufficient, all are out of date. That is no way for businesses and working people to plan and prepare. The Chancellor needs to come to Parliament today and outline the full package of support. It must be equivalent to the package put in place in March. It must support businesses forced to close and at risk of closing. And it must protect people's jobs and pay, including by closing the gaps in support of the self-employed. The government was slow to act again, but it can't now waste these 4 weeks. They must be used to fix, test, trace and isolate, and to give local control to local authorities, to get a grip on the messaging and rebuild public trust, and to provide a clear and transparent roadmap to protecting businesses and the NHS over the months to come. I know how difficult this next month will be, and the months to come. Now more than ever, we need to stand together as a country, as families, and as communities, and to show once again that at a moment of national crisis, the British people always, always stand by those in need. I know businesses will step up just as you did in March and as you've done throughout the crisis. I know from close quarters how important a good business can be to families and communities. My dad was a toolmaker. He worked on the factory floor his entire life. A steady, secure job allowed him to build a better life for his family. He built a platform for me. He gave me the tools to get on. I know that a thriving business is not just about making profit. It's a source of good jobs, of meaning, and of dignity. It's why when I see businesses struggling, being forced to close or to pull out of the communities they've been part of for decades, I know the impact that will have, not on profit, but on people. And that's why the Labour Party I lead will always recognise the importance of supporting business. I believe we all share the idea that business and government should work together in the national interest. In recent years, I feel that partnership has broken down. But a Labour government under my leadership will look to renew and rebuild that partnership. I think this government has let you down badly, not just on coronavirus, but also because just at this moment, the Prime Minister has decided to play needless brinkmanship over a Brexit deal. The last thing I want to do is to refight the battle over Brexit. That argument is over. It's time to move on and adapt, as I know many of you are trying to do. But the government is making that so much harder by creating an atmosphere of huge uncertainty. From your point of view and mine, it's very simple. The EU is by far our biggest trading partner. We need a good trade deal to protect jobs and protect businesses. The Prime Minister said he would get one. In fact, he said he had one. So he should get on with it. Stop fueling uncertainty at the worst possible time and secure the deal he promised. But whatever comes of the Brexit negotiations, that will not fix the long-term problems with the British economy. As a nation, we simply aren't ready for the high-tech economy of the 2020s and 2030s. We don't invest anywhere near enough in skills, in people, in science, or in the future. 80% of companies have told the CBI that a lack of skills is harming our competitiveness. More than half of the working-age population lack the digital skills required for the modern workplace. And it's estimated that by 2030, a further 7 million people, a fifth of the workforce, could be underskilled for their jobs. When I was Shadow Immigration Minister, yes, I've had all the glamorous jobs before this one, I visited businesses across the country and asked them what the single biggest obstacle was to their success. Every time, they said the same thing: skills. If we are to compete in the decades to come, academic skills alone won't be enough. We need world-class vocational education, lifelong learning, in-work training, and for a Labour government led by me, that will be a priority like never before. Because the days when the school gates opened and let you out, and the factory gates opened to let you in, are long gone. And you know, as well as I do, that there's only one way to create the high-tech economy we need to be. And that's through investing and in training the next generation with the skills that they need. But for a decade, we've not invested in the future. And one of the consequences is that we are profoundly unbalanced and unequal as a country. Our great towns and cities in the northwest, the Midlands and the northeast, once the cradle of our industrial revolution, have been ignored and marginalised. This has to change, because we cannot go forward as a country if we do not spread the rewards of prosperity more fairly, and if we do not close the productivity gap across regions and nations. I believe Britain can and must create a more dynamic, innovative and high-tech economy fit for the 2020s and 2030s. The best days are ahead of us. But the truth is, at present, our economy rewards short-termism. It's low pay, low-skilled and unbalanced. I know that this frustrates you as much as it does me. In the last decade, something profound has happened in our country. For years, the essential bargain of post-war Britain was that for every boost in prosperity, that reward found its way to the factory floor. But that bargain has broken down. Earnings have stagnated since 2010. The cost of living, the price of food, housing, utility bills has gone up, and the returns to shareholders have carried on rising. That bargain is no longer being honoured. It's fueling resentment, anger, and injustice. Together, we have to find a solution so that when this crisis is over, we build a more sustainable model and a new partnership that can bring businesses and working people together. I can pledge to you today that a Labour government under my leadership will back British businesses to grow, to succeed, and to expand. We'll provide the incentives, the corporate structures, the investment and the stability you need to plan for the long term. We'll champion businesses of all sizes and in all parts of the country. And we'll always recognise businesses for what they are, an indispensable part of creating prosperity, good jobs, and good communities. My aim is simple, that under a Labour government, every community and every town has world-class local businesses. Businesses that are a source of pride, jobs, and prosperity. But like any joint venture, we'll ask for something in return. We'll expect businesses to look beyond the next quarterly statement or annual report and to focus on long-term prosperity and the long-term interests of local communities. We'll expect every business to play its part in delivering the transition to a net zero economy as soon as possible. We'll expect businesses to work with trade unions to treat their workers with fairness and dignity, to invest in their skills, their future, and to provide the sort of secure foundations that a life can be built upon. We'll expect businesses to compete fairly and to play by the rules in spirit and in letter. We'll expect businesses to leave a lasting footprint in local towns and communities, working with local schools and colleges to upskill and empower local people. And we'll expect every business to consider the role it can play in promoting greater social justice and tackling the deep-seated inequalities that exist in our society. Most businesses already do this. Many go further. Every week I meet fantastic British businesses that show what can be done, even in this climate, to invest in people and in our communities. But if we're to make this a reality across the country, to build the new partnership businesses need for the 2020s and 2030s, it needs an active, pro-business government. And that is what Labour, under my leadership, will offer. When a business is failing, it's often because the management is failing. The Labour Party is now under new management. We recognise that businesses with high standards are the only way to create a good economy and the only way to fund a good society. I know we share these objectives. We do not seek growth for its own sake. We seek it because by improving living standards, we can grow as people and as a country. I want to thank the CBI and British business for everything you've done, and I look forward to what we can achieve together. Thank you.
Keir, do come and join me over here. And just to say thank you. Thank you for being here at an incredibly important time. Your personal support for business that comes through so strongly. And can I just say that commitment to rebuilding a partnership with business could not be more welcome. And I have personally felt it in the 6 months since you took over as leader.
Thank you.
So thank you for all of that and your very wide-ranging speech. We do have some questions for you. I would like to start with one, if I may. We then have 3 from our members, and then we do have some press questions to follow up with. And if I may start with a question that is really about that very delicate and difficult balance between challenge and consensus at this really difficult time. We feel that we hear your challenge to the government, and it's a really important role of opposition. We also know how important collaboration, partnership, and national unity is for individuals and for our businesses. Can you talk to us about how you are approaching that? Because it has felt as though it has changed over the course of this pandemic. And any thoughts you have on how we find the national unity that is going to be so important to defeat this virus?
Well, look, I think the national unity is really important. That, as a nation, people are very concerned about their health, worried about their families, they're worried about their jobs, and they want to see all leaders in business and politics pull together to get through this pandemic. That's why I said when I was elected leader of the Labour Party that I'd take a constructive approach, which would be to support the government where we think they're getting it right, but to challenge them where they're getting it wrong. That is why this week we will support the measures announced by the Prime Minister on Saturday, notwithstanding what some of his own MPs may do. We will support them. On the other hand, it is important that we challenge, and the 2 or 3 examples I can give of that are we will not get through this pandemic successfully if we don't fix, test, trace and isolate. And we've pushed the government hard on that because it's very important that they do fix it. And without the economic support that is necessary. And we challenged them hard over the last few weeks when the government ignored the sage advice and have got themselves into a position now where, frankly, the lockdown will be longer than it would otherwise have been. It'll be harder because, if you can believe it, we've just missed half term when the schools would have been shut, and there'll be a very human cost to that delay. So getting that, it is important, I think, to support where it's appropriate to do so, but also to challenge, because unchallenged decisions, in my experience, are often the worst.
Understood. Thanks very much. And can I say we hugely support your ambition to use this month of breathing space to get testing sorted.
Yeah.
And we think mass rapid testing as well as test and trace. So very much with you on that. We're now going to go to a few questions from our members.
Okay, brilliant.
And they should magically appear on our
Where are they
screen.
going to appear?
Right here. So we are going to hear first from Jackie Hall, who is president of CNG in Yorkshire and Humber. And Jackie is going to put our first question. Over to you, Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hello, thank you, Carolyn. Good morning, Keir. Yorkshire and Humber is a proud region with a rich industrial heritage. The region has pockets of excellence where innovations, goods and services and skills are being developed that are vital to reaching the UK's long-term climate change commitments. What are the Labour Party's plans for ensuring that there is a just transition to tackling climate change, where everyone can feel the benefit of our future low-carbon economy? Importantly, where the scale of green employment and jobs can be realised.
Thank you very much for that question. And you're absolutely right about Yorkshire and Humber. I, 2 years ago, presented the awards for the Yorkshire Post's Fastest 50 Yorkshire businesses. And it was an incredible display of innovation and all sorts of different businesses thriving in Yorkshire and across the Humber. It is important on just transition that we hardwire in net zero. And that's one of the reasons that Annalisa Dodds, the Shadow Chancellor, has said that all of the budget lines will be tested against net zero. I think it's also important to be clear that we cannot use public funds to support businesses that are heading in the wrong direction rather than the right direction. So it needs to be hardwired in as we come out of this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Donald McGarver, who's speaking us from the east of England, and he is CEO of Amino Technologies. Donald, over to you.
So Keir, thank you for your comments this morning, particularly the recognition of skills to business, which is probably relevant to my question. Both professionally and personally, I'm really concerned about our young generation. Those aged between 18 and 24 are twice as likely to have lost their jobs in this COVID period, with over 20% now unemployed. And almost 2/3 of those still in employment have suffered significant fall in their earnings. A recent studies identified that just 18% of graduates have managed to secure appropriate jobs this year, compared with a typical 60%. And the jobs and opportunities available to them have absolutely plummeted. So whilst those aged between 18 and 24 suffer the least physical effects of coronavirus, it's them that will bear the biggest burden socially, mentally, and financially in the coming years and possibly decades. So if we are truly to build back better in this post-COVID and post-Brexit world, it's this generation we need to prioritise. What will you do to ensure that we address this problem to engage and support our young generation?
Donald, thank you for that. I mean, you're absolutely right. Young people have been hit very hard in recent years. And my concern and yours and across business is that they'll be hit really hard in this pandemic by the nature of the impact it'll have on them. That is why we made the case for the Future Jobs Fund, which was the fund that the Labour government put in after the financial crash to get young people back into the workplace as quickly as possible. In fairness to the government, they took that idea and adapted it in the Kickstarter programme, which is a good programme to get young people back into work, because the quicker we can get them in, the better. There are longer-term issues, though, Donald, that we need to address. One of them is the skills issue. I was so struck when I went around the country talking to businesses in every region, everywhere, whatever they did, they were absolutely clear that there's a skills mismatch between young people coming out of education and what they need in business. And that's been there for a very, very long time. I do think we've also got to address some of the wider issues, because for young people, housing is an issue. Whether there's a business or a job near them that they can do or want to do is a real issue. So there's short-term issues, but I think there are longer-term issues here as well, Don. We need to all work together on, and this is something which can't go in 5-year cycles with different governments. It's got to be a long-term project. Thank you, Donald.
Keir, thank you for that answer. And it was a theme actually of my speech this morning. It was very much about the next generation and how hard hit they are by this pandemic. So I think hugely welcome your words on that. Our final question from our members before I actually go to the chat, where we have lots of questions coming in, is from Wayne Harvey, who is chairman of Cardiff Airport, and he is, of course, speaking to us from Wales.
With lots of model aeroplanes.
Over to you, Wayne, with your wonderful aeroplanes.
Good morning, Sir Keir. Unfortunately, those are the only airplanes that we actually have at the airport functioning in some shape or form today. As you'll be blissfully aware or unblissfully aware, the UK is one of the most geographically unequal countries in the developed world. And within the four home nations, there's also further place-based inequality, as has become apparent in recent months. It's clear that governments, contrastingly though, cannot ever be all things to all places. What's your vision for regional connectivity, and what role do you see infrastructure, and you'd expect me to ask this, in particular regional airports, in levelling up a COVID and Brexit impacted economy?
Well, regional connectivity is a huge issue. And almost everywhere I go around the country, there are issues about connectivity and people being able to move between different places, get to work, get to home, etc. So I'm a strong supporter of better connectivity. That's a long-term commitment from me. Obviously, it has to go hand in hand with the ambition on net zero, but we have to recognise much better connectivity is needed. Regional airports are part of that. They are vital to local economies in many respects, and that's why we've called for a support package for the aviation sector coming out of COVID, which, as you pointed out at the beginning of your question, has been particularly hard hit. We want to ensure aviation survives, regional airports survive through this, because we need better connectivity, not worse. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Keir, and thank you, Wayne. Keir, we've got so many questions coming through online, and I'd like to just put one or two of them to you.
Okay, yeah.
And actually, the first one is actually also about aviation and how we get our country flying again, because we are an open economy and we need our airports and aviation industry to work. I've got a question from Saad Hammond of Key Travel, who's saying that the travel industry has been disproportionately hit compared to other sectors. What can be done to advocate an airport pre-departure testing regime to be able to, even as the pandemic is with us, to be able to get people in the air, the airport sector, the aviation sector working again?
Well, I think the more we can test people before they take off or when they arrive, the sooner we will fix this problem, because aviation has been particularly hard hit. The quarantine rules, it was curious, to say the least, that we didn't have quarantine in the height of the first wave, and then we had it in a very mixed way afterwards. I'm a big advocate of testing at airports. It will still take some time for the results to come through, but it will speed things up and allow us to get back to a degree of normality sooner rather than later. I'd also say this, because one of my points of difference with the government is in their approach that if a job isn't viable, or they were saying this earlier, now the second wave it's slightly different, that if a job isn't viable this autumn, then people ought to go off and do other things. I just never saw the common sense of that with aviation. We are going to need an aviation sector. We're going to need airports. We need people with those skills. And the idea that somehow our message to them this autumn or maybe next spring is that if you're not operating normally now, you're not viable, just seems to me profoundly wrong. It is true that sometimes some industries and sectors die for various reasons. This is not one of those situations. And that's why we've said to the government, you've got to bridge aviation in particular to the future.
Thanks, Keir. And that very much, I think, echoes sort of thoughts we have, which are around the enablers of our economy have to be protected to be able to come back, and aviation, transport, childcare. I mean, there are a set of enablers here that we need to get us out of this. Got a very interesting question actually here, which is looking to some of the changes we might have that can be positive coming out of where we are. So Marcus Clissold-Lesser of Traverse has asked, the coronavirus has had many negative results. However, there have been some positive developments. What do you think the most important positive developments of the situation are, both for the UK and the world in general?
I would actually start with something very human, which is the solidarity that British people have shown. It's been across the world, but we particularly felt it here, to each other going through this pandemic. It has been quite extraordinary. Whether it was the clap on a Thursday night, whether it was the number of people that helped provide food or just knocked on a door. As a nation, we haven't lived through something together for a very, very long time, and that solidarity was huge, and it was at every level. Individual families, individuals, charities, religious bodies, businesses chipping, businesses changing what they produce for a short period to produce sanitizer or ventilators. An incredible sense of solidarity, and if you like, a sort of reminder of what really matters to people. So I'd say that. On the more technical front, I think we've all learned that if you do Zoom calls all day long, it drives you mad. But they are really useful. The number of meetings I've had with local leaders that have been able to conduct in about an hour and a half instead of devoting a couple of days' travel. So I can see that some of that sort of accelerating the way we use technology, I think, is here to stay, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and we have 8,000 people with us from around the country.
Well, this is an example.
On exactly that. One final question, Keir, before we turn to our colleagues from the media. We've had a lot of questions through around the combination of Brexit and COVID for business. And I'm just going to put the sort of the straightest put one to you now. It's from Claire Taylor from simplyvat.com. And she's asking, how do you think businesses will cope with the impact of COVID and Brexit over the next couple of months?
I think with real difficulty. And I think you, Carolyn, said that the announcement at the weekend is a body blow, and it is, because last time we were discussing this, only I think week before last, it was how businesses cope through, but in an environment which didn't involve a lockdown like this. So it's going to be really, really tough. We need those support packages in place. We need the government to recognise what viability really means, and we need the government to get a Brexit deal. And we absolutely need them to get a Brexit deal. That's in the national interest. And that's what the Prime Minister promised, and he needs to deliver on it. And he needs to deliver soon, because businesses across the country are saying to me, as they've said so many times, the uncertainty of not knowing is what is causing, more than half of the problem. And the time left to prepare now is just, the clock is going down and down and down. And so, it's going to be hard. We need to support businesses through this. This is a very, very tough period.
Thank you, Keir. So I'm now going to move to questions from our media colleagues. And the first one, which I think, again, will appear magically on our screen here, is from Emilio Casalicchio from Politico. Hello, Emilio.
Hi, Emilio.
Hi, thank you, and thanks, Sir Keir. I've actually got two questions, if that's okay. Firstly, following on from that Brexit topic, you don't want an extension to the Brexit transition period. Does that mean that you accept that the impact of the inevitable border controls on businesses that have already been crippled by the pandemic, is a price worth paying to get Brexit done? And secondly, just coronavirus-focused question, do you think that the government is being fair to all businesses in this pandemic, no matter where they are in the country? Or do you feel like some of the northern mayors feel that only when London is at risk that the government pulls out the big guns in terms of business and job support?
Emilio, on the extension, there's no prospect of an extension now. There was never going to be a vote in Parliament on it. There was no way of it being forced. And that is why I say to the Prime Minister, you promised a deal, get on with it. The outstanding issues are capable of being resolved. They need to be resolved in the national interest. The Prime Minister went to the country last December with one central commitment, and that was that he'd got a Brexit deal already, oven ready. Now he needs to deliver on it, because the impact on businesses and thus on communities and the whole country will be profound if he fails to make good on that commitment. On your second question about all businesses, no, I think there have been gaps in the scheme. The original furlough scheme we supported, but it was clear there were gaps, particularly, for example, in relation to the self-employed. And those gaps are just getting bigger at the moment, and they need to be filled. I do think there's a strong feeling in the Northwest, the Midlands and the Northeast that when, even in the last few weeks, they were calling for more business support, the Chancellor was saying no, only now to put that in place. And there's a deep frustration because they've been in quite severe restrictions for a very long time, and that has had its impact on businesses. And the other thing I'd say is that this is why we need to see the detail from the Chancellor. In recent weeks, the government has not acknowledged the role of those supplying to businesses that are forced to close. And therefore, whilst there was some support for those businesses that were closed, those that were supporting those businesses were left with very little support. So we need to, that's why the Chancellor should really come to Parliament today and set out the package of support that he's going to put in place for businesses. Thank you.
Thanks, Emilio. Thank you. So we're next going to go to Dan Thomas from the Financial Times. Dan at the FT. Over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, Keir, at the CBI conference this time last year, Jeremy Corbyn had just unveiled the most radical business agenda since the 1980s. And this was seen as broadly anti-business in its sweeping nationalisation plans in particular. Have you dropped the plan to nationalise BT? Are you rethinking those other radical business policies? And what new concrete policies from Labour do you think will win over business leaders, which, as you say, are so crucial for the future of the economy?
Thank you very much for that. As I said in my speech, a Labour government led by me will be pro-business, working with businesses and recognising businesses for what they are. So that's the most important starting point. Obviously, in 2019, we suffered a devastating loss at the election. And I think it's very important when you suffer a devastating loss that you don't look to the electorate and say, what on earth were you doing? You look to yourself as a party and say, what on earth were we doing? Which is why I'm determined to rebuild. And frankly, some of the discussions we were having as a country in 2019 about the economy have been so profoundly changed by COVID that we're all going to have to put our heads together in relation to the short, medium and long-term recovery from this pandemic. So there is a need for that rethink. I'll do it with business. And that's why I've had a lot of engagement in the last 6 to 7 months since being a leader. I do think there are challenges to the way businesses are owned. I do think there are changes that need to take place. If you look at rail, there are real problems with the franchises that have been running in the last few years. We are now in a changed situation, and the vast majority of the public want to see rail in some sort of common ownership, and I support that. But also, there are other examples. I think that the privatisation in the criminal justice system, which I was part of before I became an MP, didn't help. And actually, it's no surprise to me that probation, for example, has had to be taken back into the public sector. So I don't think it's a one size fits all, but I do think there are clear examples of where, and criminal justice would be one of them, where simply privatising has not worked. Now, that's a discussion we're going to have. We're going to have it in the context of coming out of COVID-19. I think it's a discussion that we need to have together because, and my relationship with Caroline's interesting on this because she's always said to me, you tell me what it is you want to achieve and I'll tell you whether I think it's going to work or how you might do it better or differently or maybe agree with you. Many challenges been put in. That's the way it should be, with ideas sort of held up to the light in public so that people can test, probe and work together on the way forward. Thank you.
And Kieran, I think that is exactly the dialogue we want. It is how we solve the problems with solutions that will work in terms of the competitiveness of our country as well. So we really hear that and welcome it. Our final question from our media colleagues is Shihab Khan from ITN. So over to you, Shihab.
Hi, Shihab, again. We saw each other yesterday.
It's nice to see you again, Sir Keir. You've been calling for a national circuit breaker lockdown for a while, and your party will now not oppose these new restrictions that are coming in, which many businesses say will impact them harshly. What extra specific support would you provide businesses that the government isn't and you think should be? And another quick question, if I may. The Business Secretary today was suggesting that we may never get a vaccine. If we don't get a vaccine, what do you think is the route out of this crisis?
Well, on the support package, I can't tell you what we'd do differently to the government because we haven't heard the government's package yet. In broad terms, I think we need something similar to the package that was put in place in the first phase. There are some lessons to learn about how that package worked. there were gaps, there was some delay in implementing parts of it, all of which I think can be dealt with. I think those who are self-employed feel particularly recently that they haven't had the support that they need. But we do need to hear from the Chancellor what the package is so that we can then point out where we think it should go further or not. I mean, I was really struck, and I hope we can do this again. During the first phase of this, I think, the CBI and the TUC, for example, were talking about what the package should be. That's exactly the right relationship going forward. On the vaccine, I've spoken to a number of experts on the vaccine. I think the predominant view is there will be a vaccine. So I don't subscribe to the view that there isn't going to be one. But I don't think it'll be necessarily what people are expecting in terms of whether it's 100% effective across all ages, etc. So we're going to have to adapt. But I'm optimistic, and I'm sure I speak for everyone in saying I really hope there is a vaccine. It may take longer than we think. It may not operate exactly as people think, where there'll come a day when everybody's vaccinated and we go back to normal. But I do think in the end there will be a vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, Shihab. And thank you, Keir. Before we close, can I ask you one final question? And it really is building on the question Dan asked about the relationship between Labour and business. It has been incredibly encouraging to see the reset and the hand of partnership. Is there anything further you can say, Keir, about sort of in reassurance to businesses who are nervous? They are nervous about what the Labour Party might mean for business regulation, for taxes, yes, for ownership. Is there anything more you can say to those on the call who may be feeling the talk feels good, but will it feel right in practice?
Well, I think the talk is important. Saying we're pro-business, not just saying we're pro-business, but recognising the role that businesses have, which is a different thing to simply saying you're pro-business. And I think that's very important. The engagement is important. I want us to do things with business, not to business. I don't think that we should impose things and do it to. It is right for a government to set the framework, but it's right that that should be done hand in hand with business, working together. And in terms of actions, not words, I mean, we're only 6 to 7 months into this leadership, new leadership. But I think a lot of businesses would say there's been high levels of engagement across the shadow cabinet. And I think, and I hope, that people in businesses will look at my role when I was Shadow Brexit Secretary and say, actually, this isn't just something for the last 6 to 7 months. Keir Starmer has been engaging with businesses for a number of years, really understanding what the Brexit implications will be. And as I've said before, a number of positions we took in relation to Brexit, or points that we made and challenges, were actually because we listened long and hard to what businesses wanted. So there is evidence there, I think, not only of engagement in the formal sense, but engagement leading to a strong position taken by myself and others in support of what businesses need. So, but this will develop over a number of years, and as with all things, I'll be judged by my actions, not by my words, and that's fine by me.
Keir, that is brilliant. And just to say, I can attest to, you started your speech this evening talking about being in the trenches, listening to business through the challenge of the European negotiations. That was absolutely right. And we have seen that. We have seen the engagement, and not just with you, but also with your front bench. So let's build on that. Let's continue that. And I think you'll have real willingness by the businesses on this call to do that. I'm going to hand to Karen Billamoria now, our president, just to say a few words of thanks and a few closing remarks.
Okay. Sir Keir, it's so good to see you. And I've had the privilege of sharing the platform with you many times over the years.
Yeah, of course.
And you've always been so sensible and so thoughtful. And that's come across throughout this session. And we've seen the extraordinary level of partnership from your team and from the Labour Party. So thank you for being with us.
Please.
And we've covered such a huge range. I mean, to try and summarize this in a few minutes is a challenge. But you've talked about building bridges, about the partnership between British business and the Labour Party. That's where you started, and that's where we've ended. You talked about lives and livelihoods, the test, trace, and isolate, how important that is to get it right. You talked about a clear, transparent roadmap and not just the NHS, but the NHS and business. And you said we stand together. British people stand by those in need. And I think that really stands out. It's something we as a country should be so proud of, some of the things that you've said. And what you also said about business is not just for profit. It's for good jobs, it's for meaning, it's for dignity, and it's for the impact on people. And we always say, when we talk about it's people first, and that came out. Brexit, you've been very emphatic throughout that it's time to move on and adapt, about a trade deal that'll protect jobs and businesses. We spoke about skills and digital skills, about lifelong learning that is so important, about the productivity gap and across the regions and nations. And the government talks about levelling up. Well, it's a real challenge. And then on optimistic note, which has come throughout, the best days are ahead of us. And you want to be a champion of businesses of all sizes for people across the UK and creating prosperity, good jobs and good communities. We spoke about net zero. And then more than once, you have acknowledged how Francis O'Grady, the TUC and Carolyn have worked so well together. And the whole country has seen this. And then you said, the Labour Party is under new management. And having a good opposition is a healthy thing. As a parliamentarian, I can tell you, for the country, for business, for the economy. The young generation, this is something Carolyn spoke in her opening speech. You spoke about that, and you acknowledged that the Kickstarter is a good idea. Housing, we spoke about, once again, geographic inequality and connectivity. I mean, the questions were terrific. The mass, rapid, affordable tests you agree with, as well as airport testing, which we have been calling out for at the CBI for a long time. And then Carolyn said the enablers of our economy have to be protected, and that came through very clearly. The solidarity that you spoke about, the adoption of technology, here we are, 8,000 people at this conference. This would not have happened before. So finally, Carolyn mentioned it was a body blow to business. What is happening now, this lockdown, you acknowledge that. And a Brexit deal is in the national interest. The uncertainty needs to be removed, and it's time to prepare. So the vaccine you spoke about as well, and I want to conclude again. Optimism, that came through time and time again when it spoke about the vaccine as well. And I'm with you, I'm very optimistic about it as well. So here we are, you said, with business, hand in hand, action, not words. And I believe you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that is just the right place to end. So let me hand over to James just to close this session. But thank you again, Keir. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you, Karen. Of course, thank you to Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. You heard from Keir the extraordinary power of Zoom, of these digital interactions we have. We've also learned a little bit about the value of taking a break from our screens. So we're going to give you a break, not least to have some lunch. But we're going to be back at 2 o'clock. And so please do join us then. We pre-recorded a discussion at the end of last week on the future of the UK economy. Ray Newton-Smith, who's the chief economist of the CBI, is going to be giving some outlook into 2021. We're joined too by Sue Garfitt, who's the chief executive of Alpro, Alan Jope, who's the chief executive of Unilever, the company that ranges from Dove soap to Lipton to my personal favourite Magnum ice creams, and Gavin Patterson, who is the president and chief revenue officer of Salesforce, as well as Professor Devi Sridhar, who is the chair of global public health at the University of Edinburgh. It's a really substantial discussion. It's about the future of the UK. We hope we'll see you there at 2. Many thanks.